very welcome.
Can everybody hear me okay? I want to thank you, Jen and the kindergarten kids. We are going to hear another song in just a moment. But first of all, I'd just like to say a very big welcome. Thank you so much for making it to this event. It's a really important event today, and it's so fantastic to have you here. My name is Kelly Howe, and I'm a Blair Primary School mum or parent and group leader for Eco Walk and Roll to School. You may have noticed the video of the school up there. It is behind you. Before we get started, emergency exits. You may have noticed them on your way in. That's the front exit out onto the main road, or the back exit out into the car park. Toilets are in the foyer to your left and right as you walk out towards the car park. Our program, just so you're aware, finishes around 3:40, 3:45. In between, there'll be an opportunity for children to move into the craft room so they don't get bored. Now, today's event is being hosted by the Australian Parents for Climate Action, Eco Walk and Roll to School, and the Conservation Council SA. We're also being very well supported by Blackwood Uniting Church. Today would not be possible without our candidates. I would like to welcome our 4 Boothby candidates who are taking part in the Q&A today. We have Jeremy Carter for the Greens, Dyer, our independent, Louise Miller-Frost for Labor, and Rachel Swift for Liberal. I'd also like to acknowledge Frankie Bray for the Animal Justice Party and Peter Harris, the Australian Federation Party, who I believe are here today. And would love to speak with you if you have time after the event. I'd now like to ask Craig Wilkins, Chief Executive for Conservation Council SA, for an acknowledgement of country.
Thank you so much, and welcome to everybody. It's my very great pleasure now to give an acknowledgement of country. So, Nina Mani.
Mani Ai.
Fantastic. Nalu Tapinti, Nalu Ghana, Yatongaga in Parenti. We acknowledge we are meeting today on Ghana land. We acknowledge elders of yesterday, today and tomorrow. And we acknowledge that the Ghana people have done an extraordinary job of wisely caring for country over many, many generations. And we look forward to whoever represents Boothby at the federal election to take some of that wisdom to Canberra with them, especially in the face of our changing climate. Thank you.
Okay, everyone, we're back up.
Okay, now we're going to have 2 more songs from our very special Jen Lush and the Eden Hills Kindergarten Kids. Give them a hand.
Thank you, everyone. It's lovely to be here. It really is. We have a song that was started off by Zaki here, young Zaki, who's a wonderful caretaker of trees. And it was taken, we all came on board with it very quickly at Kindy, and it became this song called Don't Cut Down the Trees. Remember, make sure we're in the right key. I'm going to actually make it that key. Okay, are you ready, everyone? It sort of addresses the conundrum that we have where we must, and we do, and we will continue to use wood and resources. But how do we do that without destroying the environment at the same time? It's a very complicated thing to be thinking about, but as you know, most of you must know that 4-year-olds are very capable of asking big questions. Don't cut down the trees, don't cut down the trees, don't cut down the trees, please don't cut the trees. lot more trees now. Because chairs are made from trees. Chairs are made from trees. Shelves are made from trees. Shelves are made from trees. Guitars are made from trees. Guitars are made from trees. Cubbies are made from trees. Our cubbies are made from trees. We can cut a little bit of leaves down. We can cut a little bit of trees down. We can grow a lot more trees down. We can grow a lot more trees now. Because bridges are made from trees. Bridges are made from trees. Sheds are made from trees. Sheds are made from trees. Books are made from trees. Our books are made from trees. Tools are made from trees. Our tools are made from trees. We can cut a little bit of leaves down. We can cut a little bit of trees down. We can grow a lot more trees now. We can grow a lot more trees now. So don't cut down the trees. Don't cut down the trees. Don't cut down the trees. Please don't cut all the trees down. We've got time for one more. We've got a very quick one for you. This is called Resting Tree. We're on a tree theme. It's easy to have a tree theme when we live in such a tree-lined place. The kids always respond to the environment that they're in, and this is very fortunate that we have such a beautiful space to be in. It's called Resting Tree after a tree that was decided by the children to keep at Kindy when we were re-landscaping the place, because for one child it was the resting tree, and this resting tree was very important to him. He would go up to it and rest on it, and other children also expressed that they did the same thing, and it's now known as the resting tree. Resting trees' branches are very soft. They're so soft you can lay down on them. I wish you were a bear. Resting trees' branches are very soft. They're so soft you can lay down on them. I wish you were a bear. You can even fall asleep on me, said the tree. You can even fall asleep on me, said the tree. To me, to me. Resting trees' branches are very soft. They're so soft you can lay down on them. I wish you were a bear. Well done, children. Children have been here some love. Can I just say that they do write all the words and the melodies themselves, and I just facilitate. Thank you. Okay, it's time for us to get off. I think if you want to come and sit. Where do we go?
All right, thank you
Back over
so
to you.
much. Now,
Back
guess
to mums and
what?
dads.
The creche craft room
This one.
is open. There are some amazing crafts out there to do. So anyone who would like to go out to the craft room, there will always be a parent. Andrea, wave your hand. who can bring you back to your parent at any time, okay? So that will be supervised.
Excuse me, is it?
At the same time, could I ask the candidates to come up onto this stage? Okay, we're almost... Take this up for a second. Just a couple more words from me before I hand over to get started on our program. So I'm opening this event representing Eco Walk and Roll to School. Eco Walk and Roll to School is an initiative of a group of, as we class ourselves, busy parents of the Mitcham Hills who want stronger action on climate change. Before starting this initiative, I would talk to parents on the street and at school who I knew cared about climate change, and it seemed like they thought it was too late. They were starting to give up. And it leaves them without hope, and their children, I feel, disempowered. By walking to school wearing yellow, we give ourselves and our children a voice in our electorate to demand strong action from our federal government for a climate-safe future for ourselves, our children, and our planet. In March, we held our second walk, and we doubled the number of schools involved to 10. We had photos and videos that sent a powerful message to the PM. The most recent Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report warns we have a critical but narrowing window to act. Time is of the essence. The seat of Boothby is a marginal seat, and voting in this election has never been more important. There is no planet B. What do we say, guys? There is no planet B. I'll now hand over to Dr. Benito Cao. Dr. Benito Cao is Associate Professor of Politics and International Relations at the University of Adelaide, and he will host our Q&A session.
Good afternoon, and welcome once again to the Boothby Candidates Forum. Before we hear from the candidates, let me explain the structure and the basic rules of the forum. These rules are important for all of us to make the most of this event and to be as fair as possible to all the candidates. The most important rule to remember is that this is not a debate. This is a forum in which the candidates have the opportunity to present their policies to address climate change. So I ask everyone to listen to their statements without interruptions. This is not the moment to show your support or rejection of any of the candidates. That moment will be at the ballot box. Once I finish this introduction, each candidate will have 2 minutes to make an opening statement addressing the question, why are they standing as a candidate? And if elected, what do they hope to achieve? The order of the opening statements have been decided by draw that took place earlier today. Following the opening statements, there will be 3 questions from the organizers read out by children. Once these questions have been answered, I will ask the candidates questions obtained from participants who have emailed their questions to the organizers. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to address each question, with a gentle warning bell, with 20 seconds to go, to wrap up their answers. The bell will ring vigorously if they are still going on after 2 minutes, and I actually have a nuclear option that I hope I don't need to use, which is a cowbell. So, 2 minutes, please. At the conclusion of the Q&A, the candidates will have 1 minute each to make a closing statement. So it's now time to hear the opening statements from the 4 candidates addressing the question, why are they standing as a candidate, and if elected, what do they hope to achieve? First up, Joe Dyer.
Thank you very much, Benito, and thank you everyone for coming along on a Sunday afternoon to this really important forum being held here on the unceded land of the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains. Look, the reason that I'm running for Parliament is really simple. I think that we have been really let down by our current leadership in Australia. I think that this election, the stakes have never been higher, and the ambition and the courage and the imagination of the leadership in Canberra has never been lower and thinner and weaker. We are facing an existential crisis with our climate, and you know, the last 3 weeks of the election campaign, you really wouldn't know that. I think the decision that I took back in December to run has really been vindicated by the way that climate change has been such a low priority in the engagement of the leaders. It seems to me that we should have as a very first priority, as the fundamental underpinning to our debate, the reality that our climate is now changing to such a degree that life in this country is going to be severely impacted. Parts of the country will no longer be habitable. We have seen 1 in 100-year weather occurrences now happening, if you ask the people in Lismore, twice in every month. The fire seasons are getting hotter and longer. The fires are more intense, just as we were warned about 20 years. In Australia, we have lost decades by inaction, by denial and by dissembling. 2030 is now 8 years away. After this election, it's 2 electoral cycles away. We can't continue to have culture wars around climate. We need to start taking action immediately and drastically. And because there seemed to be no indication whatsoever that that was coming from either of our major parties, I decided to run. So here I am.
Next up, Rachel.
I'm either going to be way too tall for that or way too short for that. Is that all right? Can you hear me? Yep. So thank you, Benito, and thank you. I think the original question came from Zara, why am I running? Well, look, I'm running because I think we need more scientists, more people who've studied and worked on the environment, and more people who've run health systems that serve millions of people in our federal parliament, because I think the challenges that we're going to face as a nation are going to be things like climate change. They're going to be about how we deliver healthcare with an ageing population and health costs growing faster than GDP. My background, I studied science. I then studied environmental studies. I then went and worked for CSIRO on carbon soil capture. I then went to Oxford, did my DPhil in clinical medicine as a Rhodes Scholar, and then went to Africa and faced down an Ebola epidemic where the best case scenario was a mortality rate of 60%. So I understand how to think about problems that deliver for whole countries and, in fact, the planet. The second thing I think we need to have is people who've got real, tangible international experience and proven ability to get policy through in the most complex political environments on the planet. I was part of the UN leadership team that got the first ever health mission and the fastest mission in UN history through the UN Security Council. I have proven ability to get complicated policy done which actually saves people's lives. I think the other reason that I'd like to be in federal parliament is one of the things that's shaped my entire career is my volunteer work and my service back to the community, whether that's being in the CFS, whether that's being on the board of the local school, whether that's being on the board of the GP training organisation, making sure we've got more rural doctors. Giving back to my community has shaped every part of my career, and serving the people of Boothby would be no different.
Jeremy?
Well, firstly, thank you to all the organisers for putting on such a great event today. Got a bit of a structural issue with the microphone.
We might need an engineer.
That's it. So, yeah, thank you. It's such a great event, and this is by far the biggest turnout we've had for any of the forums on the campaign, which is quite exciting to see. My name's Jeremy Carter, and I'm the Greens candidate for Boothby. I'm an engineering director and project manager, and I have 20 years' experience leading the engineering on some of the biggest and most complex projects in the country. I'm also a long-term resident of Boothby, and I acknowledge that today we're gathered on the land of the Kaurna people. I'd like to give a quick shout out to Senator Sarah Hanson-Young, who's here with us today, and also Barbara Pocock, who's our lead Senate candidate. And Barbara is a great friend. She's an economist and she's a strong advocate for action on climate change. Now, in order to solve the climate crisis, we need more people in Parliament with real-world experience. So an economist like Barbara, an engineer like myself. Now, climate change won't be solved by one thing alone. It'll need many things to come together. Some of these are low-tech and straightforward, like planting more trees, millions of them. But engineering has a huge role to play with things like renewable energy, electrifying our transport network, sustainable building design, and better urban planning. These are all things that I'm really passionate about, and I have very strong experience in these areas. Now, the Greens want to see our country move towards a low-carbon economy and a future where we have a livable planet. And I want us to have a government that's really there for people and the community. Australia needs to be a leader on climate action, and we need to elect people who are willing to lead on this issue. And that's why I'm running for the Greens. Thank you.
Louise.
Hi everyone, I'm Louise Miller-Frost. I'm the Labor candidate for Boothby. I'd also like to acknowledge we're meeting on the lands of the Kaurna people, and I pay my respects to any Kaurna people or other First Nations people might be here today. So my background is running health services across South Australia. I worked in local government for a number of years, including bushfire risk management through City of Burnside. And then I worked for Catherine House as the CEO, running homelessness services for women experiencing homelessness and domestic violence and mental health issues. And then I worked for Vinnie's, running Vinnie services, including both retail and support services for people experiencing homelessness, food insecurity and poverty during COVID, which was a scary and fascinating experience, and felt extremely worthwhile to be able to deliver to people experiencing difficulty across South Australia in such an absolute unprecedented crisis. So in the middle of last year, I was busily delivering these services, and I was getting more and more frustrated at what I was seeing from our federal government. So this was before our federal government had not committed to 2050, and I think we all know 2050 is way too late. Scott Morrison was not going to go to Glasgow until Prince Charles shamed him into doing so. And I was just getting more and more frustrated between that and the constant scandals, the misuse of government money, the way women were being treated in Parliament House, scandal after scandal after scandal, week after week, and it just went away. So I decided that I would run because I think we need a federal ICAC. I think we need urgent climate action, and we have a 2030 target for the Labor Party. Should we be elected, we have plans which have been released that we can actually reach that target. I'll leave it there because I can hear the bell.
Not the cowbell yet.
Thank you all for your opening statements. It's now time to the three questions from the host organizations, and they will be asked by children. First question. Who's going to? Yes.
What 2030 emissions reduction target does your party support, and why? How will you achieve this?
No particular order, you can decide who wants to tackle this one first.
Oh, well, I'll jump in, and then, because I'm not a party, so I can say what I like, really. Look, I think we need a very ambitious target. When I first started researching in this area, I was sort of going for about 60% because that seemed to match our key allies, and that we needed to be, really joining the community of international nations coming together to solve this at a global level. But increasingly, actually, when you look at the science, which is radically what I think we should be doing, and developing evidence-based policy, not policy that aligns perhaps with what our donors would prefer or our ideological allies would prefer, but actually what the science tells us is required, and that's about a target of 75%. We need to start from that point and then work back, not develop some policies and see where that takes us. There's lots of different ways that this can be done. The first thing, obviously, that we need to look at is our energy and the way that we generate that. We need to decarbonise our economy. We need a moratorium on all new gas and oil extraction. There's about 130 odd applications for new mines and extensions of mines currently before our various governments. None. I mean, that radical organisation, the International Energy Agency globally, that's what they tell us needs to happen, that we have to move away from carbon-based electricity generation and energy generation and into electricity powered by renewables. The really interesting thing about a lot of these areas, transport is the next major emitter. That can be electrified. The interesting thing is that we actually know how to solve these problems. They're all there. They've been laid out for us in many different areas and fora and reports, and we're just not doing them. We're not implementing them. So let's embrace the solutions, which will give us hope, and move away from the known issues that are causing bigger issues for us as we move into the future.
Thank you.
I'm happy to go next. Well, in the Greens, we have a target of 75% emissions reduction by 2030 and net zero by 2035. And the reason that we have these two targets is because it's what the science is telling us. So globally, we need to get to 50% reduction by 2030, but those wealthy and heavily polluting countries like Australia need to do more. So that's the basis for the 75%. And with the pandemic, people learned that listening to science was a good idea. We need to do the same thing with climate change. We need real action, we need it on a big scale, and we need it now. We'll achieve this by phasing down coal and gas power by 2030, and this will be replaced by renewable energy. So we're talking about wind, solar, batteries, pumped hydro. This is proven technology which exists, it's cheap and it's reliable. Unlike carbon capture, which is a fantasy and not at any sort of scale that can be used by industry. In the Greens, we want to invest in the green steel industry to create thousands of jobs and billions in revenue for South Australia and Australia generally. What we're doing at the moment is sending coal and iron ore overseas so others can add value and make profit from it. We'll keep the iron ore here and we'll process it using renewables to create green steel, and we'll sell that to the world. We'll also invest heavily in public transport, subsidise electric cars to help Australia catch up with the rest of the world. Under this government, we've fallen so far behind. The Greens have a strong track record for fighting for climate action and achieving it. When we were in balance of power with the Gillard government, we got a price on carbon, and that saw real emissions reductions. This election, you can vote Greens to support real action on climate change and stand with the community. Thank you.
So Labor has we've definitely accepted net zero by 2050. We have a 43% target by 2030. I recognise that for many of you that doesn't seem strong enough, and I would say that we need to go as hard as possible. I'd also say unless we get a Labor government, nothing happens. So we are somewhat pragmatic in that we have to actually get elected in order to have some action. If we have another 3 years of a Liberal National Party government, we have another 3 years of complete inaction. So our number one priority has to be to change the government. We have policies that will actually get us to that 43%, so that number wasn't just a number we came up with. We have specific policies that were released in December. So we have investing renewables to make Australia a renewable energy superpower, upgrading the electricity grid to improve energy transmission, which is actually really important to be able to get renewables throughout the grid, making electrical vehicles cheaper through an EV discount, investing in green metals, steel and aluminium. And I can tell you, having been at a lunch where Sanjeev Gupta was speaking, industry's ready for it. They are absolutely ready for it. This will happen. We're rolling out 85 solar banks around Australia so to ensure more households can benefit from rooftop solar, whether they can afford it or not, and whether they can, if they're renters and they can't put solar on their roof. So this is a way of enabling people who are in different situations to be able to access solar. We're also installing 400 community batteries for the same reason, and we will get the Australian public service down to net zero by 2030.
Can we get the next question from the children, please? Oh, sorry. I crossed one name out earlier. I got too excited.
So thank you for the question. We're on track with our current plan to get to 2030 with a 35% reduction. I know we can do more. In fact, one of the biggest challenges we have is the Labor governments in Queensland and the Northern Territory, who not only rely on coal-fired power plant for their electricity, they actually use it to make money because they're the owners of it. What I know is that this is a global problem. We have a moral and ethical imperative to act in Australia and act as strongly as we can. Last year in South Australia, we worked for 180 days on 100% renewables. When the interconnector is built to the eastern states, we'll actually be a net exporter of green energy. But if we really want to solve this problem, we need to be solving it here and solving it globally. Because if we stop exports, which are $180 billion, and they fund our healthcare, our aged care, our education, our Medicare, our PBS, that's absolutely fine, but we need to recognise that other countries will step in. And nothing like the crisis in Ukraine and Russia has shown us what happens to countries like Germany and what they're able to do when they're held hostage for their power supply. So I think it's incredibly important that our solution relies on a net export of green energy. For me, one of the most promising areas is green hydrogen. Of the investments that the federal Liberal government has made, it's put $1.2 billion into green hydrogen, and that's critical because 3 countries on the planet are responsible for 50.25% of all emissions. And not only is that important for actually reducing carbon for our whole planet, because you're absolutely right, there's no planet B, we're in this together and we have to help other countries. The other thing that we've got to consider is the ethical component of this, because Prime Minister Modi said at GOP 26 that it would cost $1 trillion a year for them to go net zero by 2070. So if we're not helping countries like India go to green power, then we are not solving the problem.
Okay, now is the time for the second question.
Will you or your party support new fossil fuel development, including gas in Australia, and why?
My answer is really quick on that. And as I said before, there has to be an immediate moratorium on new extraction of gas and coal. That has been made very clear by the IPCC, by the International Energy Agency, that the pathway to net zero by 2050 is very narrow. We can't afford any more cul-de-sacs. We can't afford any more detours. We can't afford to just stay still. So I'm up for absolute moratorium as we start to phase out the existing mines that we have here and as we move to a decarbonised, renewable future.
Yep, I'll go next. just going to try and sort this microphone out. It's not behaving. All right. In the Greens, we're proposing an immediate ban on any new coal, oil or gas projects. This is what the science is telling us we need to do. The two major parties take millions in donations from the coal and gas industry, and then the Liberal Party is giving $11 billion of your money every year to subsidise coal and gas. That's $11,000 million of money which belongs to all of us, and it's being given away to wealthy companies. Australia has the greatest renewable energy resources in the world, and investment in this area will transform our economy. It'll make our country a powerhouse in the global rush to clean energy. Rapid action on climate change means a stronger economy while protecting future generations from the worst effects of climate change. But instead, the Liberal Party are throwing this all away, risking our economy because their coal and gas donors are paying them to ignore what's best for our country and for our planet. They want to open 114 new coal and gas projects at a time when the world's moving towards clean energy. If this government is re-elected, we can expect a future where other countries put trade tariffs on us. There is international condemnation for what the Liberal government is doing to wreck global efforts on climate change. In the Greens, we want a ban on corporate donations, and we want a strong federal corruption commission to investigate politicians who are putting the interests of political donors ahead of the community that they are elected to represent. The Greens don't take corporate donations. That means we're here for you, the community, and we will always stand up for you and for the planet. Thank you.
So the Labor Party doesn't have a position of immediately banning fossil fuel projects. What we are saying is that if they stack up economically and environmentally, then they would go ahead. Now, what we know is increasingly 75% of our trading partners have committed to net zero. Increasingly, we know that they're not going to stack up environmentally. We also know that global capital is decarbonising. They have a 30 to 40 year time frame on return on investment, and we already know that there is difficulty getting the finance for these projects. So we know that the market is going to ensure that economically and environmentally these do not stack up. I would also say, however, with respect to coal-fired power stations, what we've seen over the last few years from about 2018 onwards is a number of coal-fired power stations in Australia have brought forward their closing date, usually by about 5 years or so, and the Morrison government has actively fought against them. Josh Frydenberg tried to get Andy Vesey, who was the AGL CEO, sacked. He contacted directors of AGL to get him sacked rather than have the coal-fired power stations shut down. The latest round in Victoria and New South Wales, Scott Morrison was quoted as saying, and a slight misquote here in case I've got the words slightly wrong, we need to sweat these assets to the maximum of their life. So what he says is even if the industry, even if the owners of the power stations are saying to protect their shareholder value, because they haven't suddenly become greenies, to protect shareholder value, they will shut down early because renewables are cheaper. Scott Morrison wants them to keep going. I find that unsustainable.
So look, the reality is people around the planet use coal and gas. I would like to see them move away from that quickly. The only way they can move away from that is if we can provide alternative sources of green power that are affordable. And that's really what a global solution to a global problem looks like. So the Liberal government's committed to making solar 70% cheaper, down from $45 per megawatt hour to $15 per megawatt hour. We've also committed to a price target for hydrogen beneath $2 per kilo, because we know that that is the price point at which people in developing countries and large nations can actually uptake alternative sources of green power. We've invested $40 billion in renewable energy sources in Australia since 2017. We need to have solutions that go global. Otherwise, we are actually not even scratching the surface of the problem. So what I'm offering people who support me is someone who has the science, who has advocated strongly for policy on an international stage and delivered it, to advocate strongly for Australia to actually capitalise on the surplus of renewable power, be that solar and wind, translate that into green hydrogen and other renewable energy sources that can be exported so that we can plug the gap in our own domestic exports, which is what funds services in this country, but that we actually take an ethical position on the millions, in fact billions of people around the world who are in power poverty. Because if we can't make renewable energy affordable, then we're being very selfish as a nation.
There a question from the children?
What are you or your party's commitments to helping us adapt to minimise rather than enhance the impacts of climate change? Can you respond to protecting biodiversity, protecting our oceans, ceasing land clearing, supporting agriculture, and greening our cities?
All right.
We're going to mix it up.
Yeah, we'll mix it up, yes. Keep you all on your toes. Okay, so yes, look, fantastic question. We are already seeing the impacts of climate change, and I'm sure I don't need to tell anyone here that. So Labor will look at reforming the environmental protection laws to ensure that they're fit for purpose to arrest environmental decline and restore environmental health. We'll take the failed emergency response fund, which has seen next to no funding for actual projects being delivered and has gathered more in interest rates, so it's about $4.8 billion at the moment, to use for projects that deliver resilience for future emergencies. We will invest to protect the Great Barrier Reef. We've got $200 million for our Urban Rivers and Catchments program, which is about replanting wetlands, replanting biodiversity corridors and protecting those environments that our threatened native species struggle to live in our increasingly overdeveloped cities. We will deliver on the Murray-Darling Basin Plan. We have a 5-point plan to deliver on that, which includes South Australia getting the 450 gigalitres that were promised to us a number of years ago. What else? Look, that's probably a summary of what we've got at the moment, but really we are very focused on ensuring not only that we're addressing climate change, but we're actually addressing the biodiversity issues, the extinctions. We know that we are the fastest mammal extinctions in the world. These are things that we need to address if we value the community that we live in and the country we live in.
All right, let's go reverse order now. Eleanor, thanks for the question. 2 minutes is just not enough to begin scratching all the wonderful things that you raised. So I'm going to do my best, but I'm happy to chat to you offline about other things that I think we can do. So one of the things I'm particularly passionate about, having spent over a year up in Cape York working with First Nations communities, is the Indigenous Ranger program, which both serves the sea and the land, because that's good for the environment, protecting biodiversity, but it's also good for economic empowerment of our First Nations people. As someone who's worked in healthcare with underprivileged communities throughout my life, I know that actually the health intervention has very little outcome if you don't have someone with secure housing and secure employment or income. Beyond that, one of the things that I've been deeply passionate about, and probably comes back to being a science nerd, is recycling and reuse. And many of you in this room will know that 3% of Australia's carbon emissions are actually as the result of organic waste wrongly going into landfill when it could be mulched or recycled in other ways. So we need to do better at that, and we've continued to invest. We've got $2.3 billion into plastics recycling and eliminating single-use plastics, $60.5 million on recycling modernisation. We need to reuse more of what we have. We need to recycle more of what we have. That's not just about the environment, although that's incredibly important. It's also a national security issue because historically countries have sent their recycling offshore, losing the raw asset, and someone else has had the value add of doing the recycling and then sells it back to us. And I think in the current global climate, we've seen exactly the risks of having primary resources like that offshore. I'm conscious that the bell already went, and I haven't even talked about biodiversity, which is critically important, but one thing I would add is tree canopies in our suburbs, because that's important for our albedo and our adaptation to global warming, but it's also incredibly important for our native species and for soil structure and integrity.
Thank you.
I jump in, you go, your mic ready.
Great question, Eleanor. Lots of points to cover there. I'll try and cover a few of them. So in my professional career, I've been a really passionate advocate for stopping urban sprawl, and I've been to Canberra a few times and in negotiations with the federal government and also with the state government on this issue in my work. And the continued spreading out of cities, it's having a terrible impact on our environment. It's also a key driver for climate change. Australia's cities are amongst the worst in the world for urban sprawl, and we have big developers lobbying government to continue building massive new developments on areas of critical native habitat. Biodiversity has been devastated, and as mentioned earlier, we have the worst rate of mammal extinction in the world. In the Greens, we'll set a goal of zero extinction in Australia by 2030. If we don't have a goal, then we're not going to achieve it. And we'll invest in habitat restoration. We'll make a major investment in order to plant 2 billion trees by 2030 to establish green space in our cities and restore natural habitat for our animals. And with more trees, we'll not only tackle climate change directly by sequestering carbon, pulling carbon dioxide out of the air, but we'll also directly cool the areas where we live by providing more shade. And this is a mitigation against the effects of climate change. Now, these programs, they must be led by the knowledge of First Nations people. So in the Greens, we'll invest more than $700 million to increase funding for the Indigenous Ranger program. It's critical that we protect the Bight from oil and gas drilling and save the Murray by restoring and protecting environmental flows. We must strengthen our environmental protection laws. And finally, and very importantly, we will ban donations from political parties to big developers, and mining companies, so we can take back our democracy and look after the environment. Thank you.
Now I'm having the same microphone issues as Jeremy. Thank you very much for that question. I think the thing about the loss of biodiversity, it's happening for two reasons. It's happening because of the big picture effects of climate change, so that our oceans are warming and thus not sustaining the life that used to be there. But it's happening for also policy decisions that are being taken at the national level. And that includes things like, dramatic land clearing for agricultural purposes. It includes the destruction of habitats for, as Jeremy says, for urban sprawl, so that our country is no longer able to sustain the life of our wonderful array of fauna that we have here. So we need to stop that sort of activity, and we need to do that immediately again. The Murray-Darling Basin is just a really fundamental part of our environment generally, and the way that we have just treated that with such disdain as an economic resource rather than the lifeblood of our nation, that has to stop immediately too. It does require national leadership, which is what has been so lacking at every step of the way as we try and tackle climate. I mean, we've seen just recently new appointments to the Murray-Darling Basin at both an executive level and at the chair at a governance level, of people whose backgrounds are at a CEO level in agriculture. I think we've all read that terrible letter that was written out that Sarah Hanson-Young actually highlighted, where the new CEO, all he did was talk about what a wonderful resource in his first all-staff memo as he took up his position was what a wonderful resource it could be for our farmers. He talked about his agricultural background, and we know that it is the extraction of water upstream which is causing so many problems for us here downstream. So there's choices which are being made by our government at the moment which are causing the problems that we're experiencing. We can change those choices if we change our government, and we hold an incoming minority Labor government to account with a very strong independent crossbench.
We now have time for questions that have been obtained from participants who have emailed their questions to the organisers. You might have touched on some of these issues raised by these questions, so this is an opportunity to elaborate. The first question reads as follows. Climate action can be exciting and brings benefits for us all. What initiatives or ideas are you most excited to see rolled out across Australia in the next 3 years?
Who's going to jump in?
All right. Look, with my background working with underprivileged communities across South Australia, I'm actually really excited about solar banks and community batteries. And the reason for that is that this is an opportunity for people who are currently excluded from being participants in renewable energy by cost. So somebody who can't afford to have solar panels on their roof, somebody who's renting, somebody who's at a ground floor unit and there's a unit above them, so they don't have access to roof, will be able to access solar energy through solar banks and also through the community batteries. But also people who have solar panels on their roofs but can't afford a house battery will also be able to use the community battery. So for me, this is not only a really important renewable energy resource and a way of addressing emissions and driving down power prices, it's also an equity issue. And I think that's really important for us to be able to make access to renewables not something that you need to be wealthy or privileged for, but is something that somebody who is renting or can't afford these things can also access and use to reduce their carbon footprint.
Okay, we'll do the same order this time and then we'll mix it up. Look, so many things that I'm excited about. I think I've probably given away that I think green hydrogen has enormous potential. I do think that it's critically important that as governments and as society we fund lots of research. You shouldn't pick single winners. You should sow a field of flowers and see which ones bloom. But green hydrogen, I think, has incredible potential, including 16,000 jobs. And one of the things I bring from my experience in healthcare, I worked on infectious diseases substantially in Africa and Southeast Asia. And one of the things you had to do was bring people on the journey of how important vaccination is. And that's something that when I used to explain it to people, they weren't familiar with. Now that we've gone through COVID and had a vaccination program, people are more familiar that there are people that are resistant or hesitant, and you have to bring them on the journey. And those jobs are critically important in the hydrogen sector because we do have an enormous number of people in Australia employed in our mining industries. We all can see that fossil fuels are going to be diminished in the future, and we need to create opportunity for those people, which is why the federal government's invested hydrogen plants in rural and regional areas. And let's be clear, it is almost certainly not the miners that are losing their jobs, because today they're highly technical positions, very skilled. Gone are the days of the pickaxe. It's about people who are butchers, bakers, hairdressers in the local community whose assets like property get devalued when a mine leaves the town. So creating jobs in a rural and remote area are critically important. Other things that I'm excited about, block batteries that are being trialled up in Queensland in smelters as an alternative form of battery storage, alternative cathode batteries. I'm particularly excited by hydrogen vehicles that are being designed in Japan and South Korea, because that offers enormous potential to move away from the thermokinetic challenges of lithium-ion batteries, which are also plagued by supply chain shortages and ethical concerns from mining them.
Thank you.
And many more things.
You next. You go.
As an engineer, there are so many things to get excited about in terms of addressing climate change. Lots of very technical solutions. The Solar Our Schools program, which the Greens have backed today, is a really exciting one. As a building designer, I find that really clever. One of the things that I'm often trying to deal with in building design is working out how to integrate solar into buildings. When you when you have a tall building, for example, the roof area is quite small compared with the volume, so you don't get a great benefit. But school buildings, they're often 1 or 2 stories with a big roof area, and so solar works really well for schools. The other thing is the demand for power matches really well with the supply that you get from solar. So it's very clever. It's going to save schools money, and it's going to be great for the environment. So I'm excited about that one. I'm really excited about green steel in Australia. Again, as an engineer, one of the things I try to do with building design is minimise the amount of concrete. Around 10% of global carbon emissions come from cement production. So trying to reduce the amount of concrete in our buildings is really important. That means using steel, and we need to find ways to make steel cleaner and greener, and that's what green steel promises, using renewable energy, electric arc furnaces instead of the old approach of using blast furnaces. If we can do that here in Australia, instead of sending our iron ore and coal overseas to be used by others to add value and make profit, we can do that here, create thousands of jobs, bring billions of dollars in, and also improve our national security by having that capability in Australia. Thank you.
Look, I'm just looking forward to having a government that might reflect the community's view on climate repair and the need for immediate climate action. I'm looking forward to having a government that is prepared to play its part on the international stage and not be treated as a pariah and a laggard and have to be called out by the Secretary-General of the United Nations. I'm looking forward to us taking up some of the fantastic ideas that our scientists and our technologists already have and are proposing about how we can have entire communities that are fuelled by renewable power, where we've got the sorts of great ideas that Louise and Jeremy have been talking about. I don't know if any of you were at Writers' Week and heard Saul Griffith speak about exactly what you can do if you are prepared to embrace the change that is upon us. Our leadership have been letting us down, as they do so often. The people are ahead of those in Canberra, as they are on the Uluru Statement from the Heart, for example, as they were on same-sex marriage. So I'm really looking forward to having the opportunity for us to exercise our vote on May the 21st in a way which recognises the emergency that we are in. If Rachel wants to talk about we need to be part of a global solution, well, that's what the rest of the world have been telling us as well, and we're ignoring them. There are lots of great local ideas around electrifying our public transport fleet, around electrifying the government fleets, things that the governments have direct control over now that we are not doing. There are so many opportunities going begging that have been now for years and years simply because of a lack of leadership. So that needs to come first, and that's what organisations like those who are coordinating this forum today are driving. We can be part of driving the change, but to do so you need to really think really carefully about who you're voting for on May 21, and don't underestimate the power of your vote and that of your neighbours and your families, because that's what has to come first, and from that, opportunity can flow.
Thank you. The next question reads, how do you intend to ramp up the transition to electric vehicles, including provisions for funding for public transport and infrastructure?
It's my turn to go first this time. I'm pretty happy with that question, though. As an engineering director, I've led the work on some big infrastructure projects around the country, and in the last 5 years I've been pretty proud to be working on the Sydney Metro project, which is a huge expansion of Sydney's underground train system. Now, this is an amazing project, but the vast majority of transport spending in Australia goes to roads investment. This is especially the case in South Australia. So successive Federal governments have failed to understand that we can't fix road transport by building bigger roads. We need investment in public transport, in cycling and walking infrastructure. This gives people options which suit them, and it frees up the roads for those who need them. So in the Greens, we're committed to a $25 billion increase in investment for public transport nationally, and this is obviously intended to be electric and powered by a grid that is 100% renewable. A $250 million investment annually to make cycling and walking safer and more accessible, and we will invest $1.2 billion to support electric vehicle manufacturing to start up here in Australia. We'll subsidise electric vehicle purchases by $10,000 per purchase if it's an overseas model, up to $15,000 if it's an Australian-made car. For many people, this will be enough to get them over the line to buy an electric car because they're too expensive for most people at the moment. And we'll expand the charging network for electric cars across the country to better support long-distance drivers. So we need many solutions to solve the climate crisis, and electric cars and public transport are two parts of the solution. We need people in the Parliament who understand the engineering and who understand infrastructure. Thank you.
I'll go next. We're just mixing it up randomly. Look, I think I've probably been clear that whilst I'm supportive of electric vehicles, I think they're a very much interim step and not a final point on our journey. I think it's clear to anyone from a science background the thermokinetics of a lithium-ion battery don't work particularly well. I think they're a great step and we should encourage them as an interim step, but I also think we need to be investing in what the future model after that is going to look like, because these are long-term solutions we need to deliver. And that comes down to both the physics of it, but also the shortage globally of lithium and some of the ethical concerns about mining it. So certainly for them, I just think it's a step on a journey, and I think there are better technologies coming down the pipeline, particularly green hydrogen-based cars, but there are other things that I think we can leverage. One of the things that I'm very keen on investing in is more cycle paths and more walking paths. So just like Jeremy said, we can have less cars on the road where that isn't appropriate. We absolutely spend a lot of money on infrastructure in Australia, given the vast nature of our country. And so one of the things I am focused on is making sure that if you do choose to use public transport, your journey is as effective and efficient as possible, and that we don't have road traffic stopped and emitting carbon whilst they're waiting for trains and trams to pass, as well as buses. So that's why I made a commitment to the Marion Road intersection with the tramline, as well as the Morford intersection, to have a planning study there so that we actually know what we're going to do in the future. Beyond that, we're investing $250 million to have a 7 times increase in the amount of electric vehicle charging, including ultra-fast charging, which is going to be critically important if we want wide-scale take-up of EVs. And I note that the economists tell us that price parity will be achieved with electric vehicles sometime shortly after 2025. The most optimistic is a little earlier, the most pessimistic is a little later. But I think that's really important for actually having that be a vehicle of choice, although, as I've alluded to already, I'm particularly excited about the research that's coming out of Japan and South Korea.
Thank you.
Right, so, thank you. So we all know that electric vehicles are currently very expensive. They're also actually very difficult to get at the moment. You've got a long waiting period to get an electric vehicle. And we do have a very limited number that are available in Australia compared to overseas, where there are many, many options and a lot cheaper. And that's been a deliberate issue that has been caused by the government. So what we were looking for in Labor, we will reduce the import tariffs, we'll remove the fringe benefit tax and the luxury import tax, and that will enable them to be a lot cheaper when they come in. We will get the Australian Public Service to actually invest in them as fleets. And once you start getting cheaper fleet vehicles in, they turn them over every 3 years, you start getting a second-hand market come as well. when you're buying at that level, that fleet level, you start getting manufacturers and importers going, it's now worth me coming to Australia and, you know, sending my vehicles there. So that's a really important part of it. In terms of public transport, we do know that obviously Peter Malinauskas promised to deprivatise the train and tram network, and I think that will be one part of being able to make that a more effective and efficient way for people to choose public transport over their private vehicles, and that will be a really important part of getting more cars off the road. I'm also obviously very in favour of active transport, and I do talk to a lot of people about how we can do that in a way that is actually safe for people. Riding your bike along the road protected by a painted line is not actually very safe, and I hear that from people all the time. We do know that there are different types of batteries being investigated and trialled around the place. And obviously, you know, the technology we see today is not going to be the technology we see tomorrow, but we need to start now. We can't wait any longer. We need to actually get the electric vehicles into the country and get them at a price point that people can afford, and the second-hand market and all the infrastructure that sits behind, enabling them to work for people. Thank you.
Yes, I think we definitely need a lot more investment in the infrastructure here in Australia, perhaps not so much in the commuter car parks in marginal seats that don't have train stations, and a bit more in the infrastructure than can support electric vehicles. What has happened in the last few generations of electric vehicles is that most owners are charging them at home. So where we need the infrastructure of charging stations is actually for those longer distances, and that's where we need to have them rolled out. We also do need, as Louise has alluded to as well, the price of electric vehicles to come down so that they are more affordable. That can be done in a couple of ways, having more come into the country. Part of the reason that we don't have as many, and there are such long waiting periods here, is that the suppliers don't see us as a viable market because our fuel emission standards in our cars and on our fuel is still much higher than the rest of the world. So there isn't that demand-driven the demand isn't there driving it. So we need to look at subsidies, I believe, just as we did for solar panels. There is a higher upfront cost for cars that then is saved over the lifetime of the car. So we need to ensure that everybody has access to that, and that can be done by direct subsidy, or it can be done through tax credits as well. I do agree with Jeremy that, you know, this obsession that Australia has about roads does mean that cars are always our first mode of transport of choice for over 80% of the population. We can try and change that through greater investment in public transport, powered by renewable sources. But we can also do that by greater amenity within our cities, and that is looking at investment in public transport and in also active transport. We know what keeps people safe when they're riding a bike. It's actually having a proper divided cycleway. So let's put some investment in that. Let's have both levels of government working together to achieve that for us. Again, solutions that are there, easy, available, let's do them.
Cover everyone, yeah. So the next question reads, the government has sought to cut funding to the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, Australian Renewable Energy Agency, and the Clean Energy Regulator by $700 million per year across the next 3 years. Do you think this is a good idea in the current climate? Pardon the pun.
Okay. Well, I'm happy to go since that's about the current government. It was Labor that blocked the $1.29 billion of funding for ARENA. So that's the legislation that we wanted as a government to put through. We've also got a proposed $1.5 billion for the CFC fund. I'm a big proponent in us funding organisations that are separate to government to actually support how we transition to green energy. But look, I think it's overwhelmingly clear that if we're going to be blocked by Labor and the Greens, then their intention is not about actually delivering an outcome.
No, you go on.
So the Clean Energy Finance Corporation and the Australian Renewable Energy Agency, ARENA, They were established when Greens had balance of power with Labor. We obviously support them. Currently, again, I will say that the government that we have at present is giving $11 billion a year in subsidies to the coal and gas industry, and that money should be going to other things: health, education, aged care and renewable energy, public transport. That's $11,000 million a year going to subsidise coal and gas. As long as we have a party that is receiving money from the coal and gas industry, millions of dollars every year, we cannot trust them to take sensible action on climate that we need to have a safe planet and to have a future.
So as the party in opposition, I'm surprised to find that I'm responsible for something that the Liberal Party did. So I think most of us can remember seeing the Liberal government try to dissolve Clean Energy Finance Corporation and ARENA. This was blocked by Labor and the Greens, and now we see the Liberal Party or the Liberal government trying to get ARENA to fund fossil fuel projects that have nothing to do with renewable energy. So it's extremely disingenuous to try and shift the blame to a party in opposition from a party that's been in power for 9 years and has not done anything about this and is now trying to use ARENA to fund fossil fuel projects.
Yes, I think I'm in furious agreement with Louise and Jeremy on these points. We know that it was this government that tried to abolish them, and when they failed that, they've tried to use them and divert the money so that they continue to support fossil fuels. And not only that, but that they invest again heavily in the fantasy that is carbon capture. It's just a PR kind of greenwashing activity that is seized upon by this government. If you have someone like Angus Taylor driving your energy policy, it's not going to embrace renewables. We need to make sure that these organisations are well funded and that they can have integrity behind them. Integrity is just missing in so much of what this government does, which is why we need to get their dirty mitts off it, and we need to ensure that there is arm's distance between them and money that should be going into our renewables. That's what I would support. As Jeremy says, there's $11.6 billion currently being used to subsidise the fossil fuel industry. In the last budget papers, we also had to recognise that there was $10.3 billion that was in there to mitigate the impact of things like the Black Summer bushfires of 2019, the floods in North Queensland, the floods currently in the Central Coast and northern New South Wales. People who tell us we can't afford to take action on climate, A, aren't factoring in that if we don't have a planet, we're all bloody stuffed, but B, that we're actually already paying for the cost of climate action in so many different ways. So, you know, I don't doubt Rachel's good intentions and good faith here, but unfortunately the government that she seeks to join is a key part of the problem here in Australia, and until they're gone, nothing's really going to change here. So let's bring in Labor, but let's make sure that Labor is held to account and is forced to be more ambitious, because its targets won't solve the problem either, which is why you need a strong independent crossbench to hold them to account.
The next question reads as follows. Climate change is an environmental issue, but it is also a health issue and a social justice issue. How would you work to protect human health and ensure social equity in light of the climate crisis?
Divvy it up.
I'll go first. One of the, I suppose the reason I came to politics was social justice, and I think that's the case for so many of us in the Greens. One of the really unfair things about climate change is it's going to most adversely affect those who are least responsible for causing it, and that's those in developing countries. And we are likely to see more refugees as a result of climate change, and I hope that we'll have a government that will show more compassion for refugees. That's another reason many of us have joined the Greens on that issue. So taking action on climate change absolutely is a social justice issue, and it's a matter of fairness. We need to take swift action so that those in the world who are in developing countries don't have the situation made even worse by climate change. And I think it's pretty clear that we need to act swiftly to prevent that. And I think it's been particularly poor the way that we've treated our friends in the Pacific Islands. Peter Dutton laughing about their predicament and just unlucky to be caught on a microphone making what he thought was a pretty funny joke. And it's not surprising that those people are now looking to other countries for leadership rather than Australia. So hopefully we can repair that situation and we can be a country that leads on climate change and actually shows respect for others in the process. Thank you.
All right. Well, look, I mean, the vast majority of my career has been spent on health equity and primarily in developing countries. So when I lived in Rwanda, I would regularly visit families who used coal and kindling in a mud hut with no ventilation as both their source of power and their source of fuel for cooking their food, as well as purifying water if they needed to actually drink or feed their children. So most of my career is really focused on how you actually manage the health equity challenges that we face globally every single day. So one of the most critical things that we need to do is lift people out of poverty, and we need to be able to do that with affordable energy so that they are not either suffering from the carbon emissions that we've made and we then stop them from progressing, or they continue to be mass producers of carbon emissions, because the population in the countries that are impacted are large and their needs to be able to move out of poverty are great. So that's why I'm such a strong proponent of us investing so that we can actually reduce the cost per unit of green power. It matters. It affects people's lives. It affects people's lives that I've sat in their mud huts and shared a meal with them and thought about what the consequences are of decisions we make here in Australia and we make on the global stage. When it comes to health equity, we also have to think about what we're investing in terms of helping those people have the absolute basics. I worked in maternal and childhood nutrition, and I worked on that because if a child doesn't have the right nutrition from before conception to 18 months of age, they will never reach their full physical, emotional, intellectual or economic potential. So if we aren't solving problems like that, we are locking them into generations of economic harm. That is exactly why I've chosen to stand for Parliament, because that is what's motivated me my entire career.
So, yeah, climate change is absolutely a health issue and an equity issue. The health issues are, I'm sure I'm not telling anyone in this room what we don't already know, but increasing tropical diseases down into the cooler areas. We've already had Japanese encephalitis down here. We can expect things like Ross River fever, those sorts of things, dengue fever, to start coming down as we get increased heat and increased humidity. Heat in itself is a health issue. The humidity makes it worse. I was part of the 2009 heatwave response here in South Australia. We were going out to people who were in largely housing trust houses, very poor quality stock, and they were hot boxes. And by the time we get out there with an ambulance, they would be so delirious that they'd finally thought, oh, I will afford to put the power on, I will afford to put my air conditioner on, and we'd find they'd accidentally put the heater on. And that was not a one-off, that was multiple people. They were so hot, they were trying not to put the air conditioner on because they couldn't afford it, and they got so hot they got delirious and didn't know what they were doing. So it's absolutely a health issue. Bushfires, we know that one of the major things that happens after a bushfire is people with all sorts of lung issues from the smoke. And if you're actually in one of those areas, you might find that your mucus is sort of black. Sorry to be a bit gross here. it's a health issue in a whole range of ways across all of our community. So it's absolutely something we need to address from that side of things. I have already talked about some of the equity issues around solar banks and solar and community batteries, and how that will enable people to access renewables if they can't afford them. But I'd also say that our plan to address climate change creates 604,000 new jobs, the majority of them in the regions where we currently have the coal mines, etc. And that will help those people like the bakers and
First cowbell.
And reduce power bills.
I think Joe got close earlier.
I did.
At least you wanted that one.
Yeah, you did. You did. Look, there's a lot that I agree with, which has been said by Jeremy and by Louise there in relation to health. Look, I think one of the key issues is heat, as Louise alluded to. And that then, there's an intersection there with the neglect that we've had in our aged care systems as well, because it's often older Australians who experience that at its most extreme. And it can be also geographically remote Australians who experience it at the extreme. So these kind of compounding issues of neglect with our ageing population, and certainly with our remote Aboriginal population on country, these people are experiencing this in its most extreme forms. I do think we also have to look at the international equity and some of the things that Jeremy alluded to in relation to really the shameful neglect, there's that word again, of our relationships here in the Pacific and what that has meant from a national security point of view, but also from a moral and ethical point of view. We are not seen anymore, not as a leader, but even as a friend, and it's shameful, frankly. But one area I would also like to touch on is intergenerational equity. There's a lot of different areas you can talk about here, and the fact that housing affordability has really only just come on the agenda of the campaign this weekend, I think, is also disappointing. But what future we are leaving for our children, I think, is the most extreme and obvious issue that we need to confront when it comes to equity. When the younger generation is having to take our government to court to try and get them to see that they have a duty of care in the decisions that they make and the implications that they are going to have for them when they are still here with our baking scorched planet. When you have to try and take your government to court, I think we know we have a major problem. So there are a broad plethora of things that we can do. And it's so frustrating that time and time again you come back to saying, we know what needs to happen. And yet, as a result of poor leadership, it's not happening. Let's make it happen after May 21.
The final question comes with a preliminary statement. It reads, "We live in the driest state on the driest populated country on earth. My friend in Clarendon has had to evacuate from bushfires twice in the last few years. We've all seen the fire and flood footage from around the country. We're told natural disasters will only get more severe, more intense, and more frequent. That's already locked in with the best case scenario, and we're currently on track to make it worse. Does the climate crisis scare you? What do you say to those who are feeling anxious? Can you give us hope?"
I'll go first because I've been going last for a bit. Look, it does scare me. I'm frankly terrified. And that's part of the reason why I'm running for office, because I think that the window is getting smaller and shorter. What the IPCC report did tell us is that we are going to overshoot 1.5 degrees, and we're on track to overshoot 2 degrees. But we can claw it back. And this is why this election is so important. They said it's now or never. Current government is choosing never. It is choosing to continue to support its ideological allies over bolstering our future. So there is a cause for dismay, despair and fear, but what can give us hope is that we know what needs to be done, and there are vast communities here in Australia and around the world that want to do it, that know that we can regenerate, that know that the future can be ours again if we get out there and we seize it. You don't need to be told. You're here and you're parts of these wonderful organisations. But what we have to do is ensure that our leadership listens to us, and so that everything which is already fermenting at our community level kind of comes up, blooms up. Let those 1,000 flowers bloom strongly and up, and push out of the way those people who are a hindrance to us implementing the policy choices that are there for the taking. What does give me hope is that determination of so many people in Australia this time to make their voices count and to make their votes count, and so to get us back off this ridiculous path that we've been on for so long, where we have lost these years, endless years, and back on to being part of the international community, determined that for all of us, we will help save the planet, and we will fling that window open rather than seeing it slammed shut by this government again.
Yeah, I'm terrified. I think if you're not terrified, you probably haven't been paying attention or taking it seriously. This is one of the major reasons that I also came out to gave up a full-time job that I love to come out and campaign, because I also believe we need to change this government. By the time we get through this election, 2030 is 7.5 years away. That is such a small time frame to change anything. And I get that is terrifying, and I have young children. Well, sorry, my children are 22. That counts as young to me. So I count them as young, and I need to be able to tell them something. What gives me some hope is when I'm out there talking to business, when I'm talking to industry, when I see that the coal-fired power stations are trying to get out of it, when I see that global capital is trying to get out of carbon, I think there is hope. I think the community knows it. I think the community knows what needs to be done. The community knows climate change is real and urgent and we need to act. I actually think industry increasingly does as well. And we need them on board. We need them to make those decisions. They do their risk management. They know what their future is. They know about decarbonising. They know their markets are going to close. They know they have to change if they want to protect shareholder value. And if that's what it takes for them to be motivated, I'm good with that. Okay? They just need to be there and they need to be acting. So I think there is hope. What I would say to people who are looking for hope for themselves is, you guys are all out here. This is part of the solution. That conversation in the community, keeping it going, telling people, talking people, normalising it for those who are still not quite there. Be part of the solution, and that's what we all are here today for.
You next.
The most recent IPCC reports are terrifying, and after reading them, it's easy to feel quite depressed. I feel a lot of hope for the future, and there's a number of reasons for that, and one that Louise just touched on. I work in the buildings industry, dealing with infrastructure, buildings, renewable energy, and I'm surrounded by people who are serious about taking action on climate change. It's all of the industry, it's front and centre, and so we are getting on with it despite the federal government, so that gives me hope. I think I'll feel a bit more hope on the 22nd of May if we've had a change of government, because then we can really get on with it. I look at other countries, what they're doing. We have a Conservative Prime Minister in the UK who has banned petrol and diesel cars after 2030. We have Norway where they're at 70% electric cars. We have big economies like the US and China investing heavily in renewables. In South Australia, we are nearly at 100% renewable energy. In the ACT, they're already there with a power sharing agreement between Greens and Labor. So these things give me hope. When we hear the Murdoch media and the like saying we can't possibly get to 100% renewable energy, it won't work, we know that it can. It's already been done. So the rest of the country needs to get on board, and we need a government that understands that. The carbon pricing that was put in place when Labor and Greens, when Labor were in a minority government with Greens in balance of power, that worked. We just need to put it back and get on with climate action and move on. And to do that, we have to get rid of this government. But that gives me hope. Thanks.
Oh, look, the vast majority of my life has been spent dealing with crises, whether that was facing down Ebola in West Africa on the ground in conditions that, having lived and worked in Africa before that, even I couldn't have imagined, or whether that's standing on a fire ground as a member of the CFS staring down a bushfire. I know how to deal with crises, and I know how to deliver outcomes that actually have real impact and save lives. And that's what gives me hope, is the opportunity to bring those skills to our federal parliament, a proven ability to advocate for policies that I believe, and I've been very transparent with older people of Boothby about what's important to me. Climate is one of those things. Healthcare is another one of those things. And there are many others. I spent my childhood talking about the arid environment of South Australia because that's why my family came here. My father was a soil scientist. He worked on increasing carbon in the soil because carbon in the soil increases its water retention. So that's literally what I grew up talking about as a child, and I think about these things every day. I see enormous potential for us here in South Australia to have impact on the national stage if we have a strong representative in federal parliament. But even more importantly, when I think of the big challenges that are facing our planet, like climate change, like global health, I think about making sure that we have an international reach with our policies and we're actually able to deliver outcomes that don't only help the people here in South Australia, they don't only help all Australians, they actually help all people on our planet, because that is what good policy looks like.
This concludes the Q&A. So now all four candidates have 1 minute for a closing statement. I'll give you the standard 20 seconds warning. The order has been decided by a draw that took place earlier. This is probably news to Jeremy, but you're the last one. So Rachel, Joe, Louise, and Jeremy.
Thank you. Well, look, let me again thank the organisers for today. This is incredibly important, and it's wonderful to have the opportunity to speak to so many of you. For me, what's important for your representative in Boothby is someone who can actually deliver outcomes, who can deliver action. I particularly enjoyed Jeremy's point about swift action on issues, because swift action is what you'll get from me. And I don't just talk the talk. I have literally walked the walk. I've gone into the most dangerous environments on our planet to do what is right, not just right for me, not just right for my local community, for the global community. And stopping an epidemic like Ebola from becoming a pandemic saved millions of lives. Climate action is important to me. I've been transparent and clear about that. And if you honour me with your vote, then I will be the strongest voice possible in Canberra for your views as the people of Boothby.
Thank you.
You know what I think would be good for the international community, and that's for Australia to take its place again at the seat at the international table as a country that acts with honour, that keeps its word, and that signs up to the global commitments that we know need to be made on climate action. You know, as Louise says, 2030 is just a really short time away. I think for what I would like to say to you in this closing address is that let's put aside the Liberals and the Nationals, because we know they're not any good on this issue at all, and they've been a key part of the problem. The Labor Party has been really concerned for so long about the dark art of the wedge that they've been victim of with the coalition government, that they've become timid, and they're not prepared to take the action that they know needs to be taken either. If there is an independent crossbench, whether with the Greens or independents, holding them to account, we'll be saying 43% isn't good enough, and if you want our support in confidence of supply, you need to up that. You need to up the ante, because time is running out. So I really say to you, if you want things to be different on climate change, then you need to vote differently in May 21. And there's the cowbell, and I was going to get it once. So think of that when you go to the polling booth.
Clearly Joe couldn't resist the challenge of the cowbell. So my appeal to you would be, we've really got two choices here. We continue with a Liberal National Party government. The other party that can form government is Labor. My biggest fear, and with all due respect to Joe and to Jeremy, my biggest fear is we will have so many independents and small parties that we'll end up with a Liberal National Party minority government. And we know they don't deal with independents. They don't deal with minor parties. They don't even deal with their own their own backbenchers who cross the floor. If we end up with a Liberal National Party government, we get more of the same. With all due respect to Rachel, we've heard from them that net zero has wiggle room. Murray-Darling Basin plan is over. They are telling us very clearly, and I know that it might be the Nationals, not the Liberals, but the Liberals can't form government without the Nationals. They've told you what the result will be. If you want a Labor government, you have to vote Labor.
The vast majority of Australians want real action on climate change. The consequences of delaying action will be catastrophic. The benefits to our country and to the world of acting quickly will be huge. The Morrison-Joyce government are wrecking global climate action and risking our economy by listening to their donors in the coal and gas industry instead of doing what's right for our country and for our planet. Australia has the highest carbon footprint per capita in the world. We are the third biggest exporter of fossil fuels. It is disingenuous and dishonest to say that what happens here doesn't make much difference in the world, because it does. And the election on May 21 makes a big difference globally. We'll only achieve real action on climate change with strong Greens representation in the Parliament. By voting Greens number 1 and putting Labor soon after, you can ensure that Barnaby Joyce, Scott Morrison and Peter Dutton are removed and send a strong message to the next government that we want real action on climate change. Thank you.
No one can hear.
Can I
that.
just have a cowbell since I was the only one who didn't?
Nah. Thank you very much. I will now hand over to Adrienne Stoker, representing Australian Parents for Climate Action, to close our event. Thank you.
We would like to thank the candidates for coming today. We appreciate having the opportunity to hear what each of you stand for and what you and your party can offer. I'd also like to thank Dr. Benito Cow for facilitating today and doing an excellent job. The next thanks is a huge one to all the volunteers of Eco Walk and Roll to School, Australian Parents for Climate Action, the Conservation Council of SA, and also Blackwood Uniting for making this event happen. They have worked so hard to make it possible for families to participate more actively in democracy, because we know that life is hectic for parents, but they want their kids to have a livable future. We shouldn't forget to thank the kids of the volunteers that have had limited attention of late. My daughter has already told me that next week, no screen time for you, Mummy. I'm just going to keep you a little bit longer for a couple of very important things. I'll just explain a little bit about our group called Australian Parents for Climate Action, which is a non-partisan group made up of a national network of parents, carers, grandparents, or anyone concerned about the future of our children. We are calling on all our leaders to do our bit in the global community, committing to a legislative plan to reduce Australia's emissions by 75% on 2005 levels, including 100% clean energy by 2030. This is ambitious, but we're an ambitious nation and we need to do this. These are no arbitrary targets. They are supported by science to adequately address this emergency. To achieve this 75% reduction, there must be no new fossil fuel or gas projects. There is no need, as we transition quickly to renewables. South Australia has been leading the way in this for some time now. Australian Parents for Climate Action has been championing for this in a push for Solar Our Schools initiative, which asks federal and state governments to fund solar and batteries for every school and childcare centre in Australia, making them virtual power plants for the community. Since the release of the pledge, many candidates around Australia and across the political spectrum have signed up. Only a few weeks ago, we were delighted to have the candidates of Boothby listening. We would like to thank Joe Dyer, Independent, and Jeremy Carter from the Greens signing up a few weeks ago. We now have Frankie Bray from the Animal Justice Party. And, sorry, I've lost my place now. And today we had exciting news of also Labor, Louise Miller-Frost signing, and also Senator Sarah Hanson-Young from the Greens. We hope that Australian Parents for Climate Action will continue to push the candidates across the country to be able to pledge their support for this bold and exciting climate action initiative. We have flyers for this information about this. Please take a look on your way out and sign in support. Email your candidates or chat with them now. Also come and have a chat with one of us. There's lots more exciting actions that are coming up, including a big climate picnic where we're going to have a very special guest for the kids. So join up to our group with the QR code on the way out so you won't miss out. Also on the way out, I'd like to tell you about the Climate Action Now campaign, which is also a non-partisan campaign by the ACF, the Australian Conservation Foundation. It's now supported by many organisations such as ourselves and the Conservation Council SA. The idea is to display a sign on your front fence, tree, whatever, so the candidates can see this is being called for, but also to get people in the community to have conversations. If you would like to put a sign up or know someone who would, we've got several designs to choose from. A recording of this event will be emailed to you. Now this is where we need you to multiply our effort by sharing this link with everyone you know in Boothby. In the next 3 weeks, we ask you to have conversations about the exciting opportunities of climate action for our health, security and future prosperity. Talk with your friends and your colleagues at playgroup, at school, at work. Time is of the essence. Voting this election matters, and there is not another planet. Your being here today is so important. Thank you for coming.
To do something about climate change.
I don't want a bad future.
What do we want? Climate action! When do we want it? Now! What do we want? Climate action! When do we want it? Now!
We need more climate action. Climate change has got to stop.
Scott Morrison won't listen. Take action for what's wrong.
We're trying to save the environment.
I want my children to have a planet that is livable. I want climate action now.
Everyone gets the earth that we live on.
I think that we should do something about climate change.
We want climate action and there is no planet B.
No planet B!
If we don't do something now, then our future could be a disaster.
Climate action.
We need to look after our planet. This is the only planet we can live on.
This is what I stand for, climate action. This is what we stand for.
Pumping petrol gas.
No more coal, no more oil. Keep that carbon in the soil.
Keep the earth healthy for future generations.
What do we want? Climate action. When do we want it? Now.
Fossil fuels have to go.
We should start using using too much coal. Use electric cars. When I'm old enough to vote, I probably wouldn't be able to see rhinoceroses. I know we've come along. Action! We want it now! Climate action! We want it now! Hey, but tell me, where do the children play? Hey, hey. Do-do-do-do-do. Do-do-do-do.
As parents, carers and grandparents, we work hard to keep our kids safe, healthy and happy.
Sometimes that means championing their needs for them.
When they don't get a chance to have a say.
The next federal election is just months away.
That means we have a few months to pressure our candidates for a stronger climate action.
This is a critical moment to safeguard the climate for our children.
Because the decisions made now will be impacting our kids for many years to come.
This is too important to leave to chance.
And politicians want our support.
If we speak up and make ourselves heard,
we can shift the politics towards positive solutions that help secure a safe climate for all children.
I want my children to be able to enjoy the great outdoors.
I want my daughter to enjoy the bush without threat of heat waves and bushfire.
Because being a good parent means being an active citizen too.
Together, parents are powerful.
Our kids deserve this opportunity. Let's get on with it.
When they say to me, Grandma, what did you do when you had the chance? I'll say, in the 2022 election, I voted for strong climate action.
Now is the time to take action.
Together, let's raise up our voices for stronger climate action on all sides of politics.
Do it for us.
Hi, my name is Damon Gamo. I made the film 2040 because I was an overwhelmed parent that didn't know what to do in terms of climate change, so making the film was my contribution. Lots of other parents have asked me what they can do. Well, the Australian Parents for Climate Action have put together a terrific initiative called Solar Our Schools, and they're asking Scott Morrison to put solar panels and battery setups on all the schools across Australia. It's a no-brainer really, the amount of energy that our schools generate during the day. They can set up a virtual power plant, which means any excess energy can actually be shared with the community, especially on weekends and in the holiday periods. And it's a really great way to give the sense of hope and action for the students at that school. It's a boost to the morale there, thinking they're actually contributing in some way, in their own small way, to helping climate change. The benefits are enormous for the school as well. It's been estimated that the larger schools and childcare centres can save about $114,000 a year, and the smaller schools and childcare centres can save about $12,000, which obviously allows them to use that money for other resources like healthy food in the canteen and other things like that. But also jobs, thousands of jobs can be created building those setups with the panels and the batteries. So they're asking you to draw a picture of the sun with your child and post that onto social media with Solar Our Schools. I've done that with my daughter, and then to sign the petition below. They've already got 5,000 signatures, but let's really get that up to 10,000 and send this letter to Scott and let him know that, you know, the Aussie sun's been really good to us when it comes to tourism. He knows that better than anyone, but now the Aussie sun can be really good for us in terms of our schools and the economics. So get involved, it's a terrific initiative, Solar Our Schools.